Okay. All right. Hello, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Stephanie O from Delightful Things, and you see today here I'm super, super excited. I have Joelle from First Love Women, and we're just gonna kind of chit chat about this project we just worked on together. I think we're both really, really excited about this project. Is that fair to say? Yeah, absolutely. We started talking about this like almost a year ago. Can you believe that? Oh my gosh, it's totally crazy. Um, so yeah, we've been trying to get this together. I think you reached out to me. You found me through a friend, right? How did you end up reaching out to me? Yeah. Mhm, mhm.
So then we ended up kind of talking some and um, finally in the early, I want to say late summer, we reconnected because I was actually ready to do some of those things quicker than I had thought.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I was super super excited to hear from you, and I think when we initially kind of talked, like your ideas were still kind of forming and you were kind of wrapping your head around, what your ideas were even and what you wanted this community to be. So I feel like you kind of brought me in at an early level. But what kind of started you getting to think about First Love and starting that whole process of starting this community?
Yeah, actually, one of the defining things for me that kind of got me thinking about starting it was I heard this quote that says your pain will lead to your passion, which will lead to your purpose. And I had just come out of a really difficult season in my life where my brother had passed away from cancer. It was just a really dark time in my life, and realizing that like I had grown up in a Christian home in the church. My dad was a pastor, but I still felt so disconnected from God, and that was always kind of a struggle I had. And so then I started to begin to feel like for the first time in my life out of that difficult season to connect to God. And it just kind of turned into this passion and this burden that I felt for other women. I think a lot of people like want to feel connected to God, but they just don't know how.
Mhm.
And so just decided that I was going to, you know, what the things that I had done like in my life and learned about connecting with God, I was going to share that with other people.
Yeah.
So it was definitely like a hazy beginning of trying to decide what that was going to look like. Like there
Mhm.
was a lot of discussion and thinking through that process.
Mhm.
Yeah, but
Absolutely. That's so cool. It definitely, I mean, working with you, I could tell it was one of those projects that really came from the heart. This came from your creative, spirit, and just from day one I could just tell that you had so much to put into this, and that from like a design standpoint, that, makes my job easy, honestly. Because I feel like, when you feel it, that's kind of what I tend to connect with. I can see your vision a little bit, and then that's where I like to come in and try to help bring it to life. Basically just help take your ideas and get them onto paper, which is what our output was for this project, was the end up having the paper journal, which we'll kind of talk about in a second here. um, so when we met and we started talking about this project, one of the early conversations we were having was kind of about the branding and actually like the visual presence of what this community would look like for you. How did you decide to actually engage with a graphic designer to create a visual brand?
my husband and I talked about it a lot, and we just decided like early on, like if we were going to do things, we want to do them well and to create a good, strong foundation from the beginning. And it wouldn't be, it will never be wasted to do that. And so I'm not that likes to reinvent the wheel and try to do things on my own. I think there's people that have been trained to do it and they do a really good job at it. And they can probably do it about 50 times faster than I can. So I wanted someone who knew what they were doing and really could educate me in the process, which is definitely one of your specialties. So
Appreciate
yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Um,
really tricky when you don't necessarily, it's not like you're buying graphic design projects all the time or creating printed, materials all the time. Sorry, my volume here. But you have this vision for a printed product, and so it can be tricky to go through that whole entire process when you aren't super familiar with it. But I work with people all the time that it's maybe their first time going through a process like this, or the first time getting a logo made or something like that. So that is a big part of what I try to help creative thinkers like you work out through that process. I think that I do enjoy that part a lot, trying to help you kind of get through, what can be challenging at times. Hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And like I was going to ask you, because I don't know a lot of your background
Hmm.
story, like when did you decide to actually start this delightful things in company and helping creatives get
Yeah,
started?
that's a good question. It's been, I guess, a little seed in my brain for a long time. I've been a creative person for a long time and really started in graphic design pretty early. So I went to school, I pursued graphic design, studies and graduated and everything. And I started working in a design firm, which gave me, the best design experience in the world. I learned so much. But I got a little bit itchy sitting at a desk all day, every day, I'll say. And so then I actually started teaching quite a bit. And that's when I realized that my design practice and my teaching practice, I really wanted to bring together. And so I started teaching. I went back to school and became a certified teacher and everything. But I started Delightful Things right at that moment also. And I've always wanted to keep those two things always working together. So when I'm working with clients like you, I always include those coaching hours, trying to make sure that you have the support you need once, certain branding elements and things like that are leaving my hands and going into your hands to be actually used. Um, and so I've always tried to kind of incorporate that teaching aspect for sure. I love that a lot. But you, like I just mentioned, you kind of took that branding toolkit. You have done such an amazing job with this branding toolkit. I'm like blown away by this lady's Instagram, like all the time. Um, so basically we did kind of a complete branding process from start to finish. We started looking at all your inspirations and all the parameters we wanted to keep in mind and things like that. But and then obviously we went through lots of steps of the actual process. I actually have some of my design documents up, so we'll kind of peek at those in a minute. um,
Yeah.
but we would go through the rounds of design process, um, and then it can be tricky sometimes when I'm releasing some graphics to you and releasing them to the world. But you have just absolutely done a fantastic job of taking these parts and pieces and really using it how you and I intended it to be used, which was to break it apart into all these little parts and pieces and elements, and then kind of stick them back together. And it just seems like it's working for you. How has it been working on your own graphics?
Yeah, well, I there was one thing that you had said early on in the process that I really appreciated. And you said that a lot of times graphic designers like they will kind of give you this branding kit with the idea that they're going to be your graphic designer
Hmm.
that's basically works with you for the next several years. So they don't have that educational piece of like, here's your kit, and here's ways that you can apply it to stay consistent with your brand. But that was something that you offered and wanted to do because you had,
Hmm.
the world is changing. A lot of people they want to be able to do their own graphics. They know how to. We have Canva. It's very
Hmm.
accessible now. They don't necessarily always want a graphic designer, but they do need that educational piece. So that was really important to me because I love being creative, but I wanted those guidelines to keep it consistent and make sure that my messaging was consistent. Because as you know, one of my biggest, I guess you could say, weaknesses is like, I love everything. I
Mhm.
love it all. I love like every look out there.
Yeah.
And so like I knew I needed to narrow it down, hone it in a
Mhm.
little bit early on because I didn't want to confuse people.
Mhm.
But yeah, I needed that like some structure to work around. So
Mhm.
actually it's been really great. I feel like the kit that you gave me and sort of a lot of the different elements, like in just talking through it, like it was easy to apply it. And I know the look that I'm trying to create to be consistent with that messaging that I want to have.
Mhm.
So it's been really
Absolutely.
good.
That's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. You're spot on. That's one of my top priorities. Because you're right, it is changing a lot. People are, we're all small business owners. Sometimes it's a side hustle. Like we're trying to do these things for ourselves. And it doesn't make sense to, just pay for someone to just do it for you. We don't have those kinds of funds here, right? And so so I did kind of like I flipped that model on its head for graphic designers because I think a lot of graphic designers approach it like, okay, well, this is my brand and I'm going to apply it, how I see fit, and I'm the gatekeeper, right? I just like throw it out the window. I'm like, wrap it in a bow and try to give you something that really is just gonna work for you. And if it doesn't work for you, then like we gotta fix it and it's gonna be right. For sure.
Yeah. And then also, like, it's not like you're gone after that. So,
Mhm.
like, for smaller projects or like different questions and things, like you're always there. Like we have that relationship now. So
Mhm.
I feel comfortable with like knowing that I'm gonna have a question for you
Yeah.
really soon about my website. Like just little things like
Yeah.
that. Like you're still
Mhm.
there. And so I think that's nice. Like it's not like you're sent off into the world alone
Mhm.
to kind of figure the rest out. Like we have that relationship.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I appreciate that so much. It's like I feel like there's more of a trust to build together when I feel like I'm trying to set you up for success, not trying to set up us for a relationship where it's like money based, It's like
right.
that's I'll worry about that later. I really don't care that much. Like I want a tool to work for you. I want us to work on something that's valuable for you. Whatever that means. And then I feel like once we start that and then I feel like you have, gained trust in me to help you with these things, and then I do feel like you're going to come back and ask a question. I don't feel bad, like, oh, did I offend Joelle, with such and such or whatever. It's like no, like it's such a nice graphic designer relationship when we can just like, move forward and work on projects as we need to, and I just feel like we're always on the same page with how we're approaching all these things. It's just really
Yeah,
nice.
definitely. I definitely
Mm-hmm.
agree. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I mentioned before that, every creative process has some challenges. We always face these little road bumps and stuff like that. What do you feel like were some of our biggest challenges throughout the process? And you can be totally real. I've heard it all. I have heard everything. So lay it on
um,
me.
so I feel like overall it was a really pretty smooth process. I think for me, like one of my personal challenges, like I said earlier, is like I love everything. And so making those like final decisions on things, especially like as you know, the colors of what I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to use, like the idea of being stuck with like two colors or like
Mm-hmm.
typically what I see with brands like really overwhelms me. I wanted a lot of variety. So we worked at that for quite a bit. And then I was still like kind of like back and forth on it up until the bitter end,
Yeah.
which thankfully you worked with me on that. And so now I'm very happy with that. But
Mm-hmm.
that was one of the things. And then also, once we created the brand
Mm-hmm.
with the idea that we would use that brand for the journal. And what kind of got me started so quickly with the branding, because I thought that would be a few months down the road was I decided that I wanted to do this journal. That just became really important to me. And so I'm like, well, I'm not going to do this backwards. Let's go ahead and do the branding first, and then we can do the journal from that. And that worked really well, actually. But that journal piece, I feel like when it came time for the printing process, it got a little bit sticky because we had to do some shopping around. And at first, the pricing was really high for what I wanted. And so it took some time, and it kind of delayed things a little bit, trying to get to that pricing and figure it out. But once we did, it was smooth sailing after that. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. The print process is such a sticky kind of process, literally and figuratively. There's so many options out there, and there's a lot to consider beyond, what size printer you're going to work with, like what size the company is or something like that. There are just so many options and variations on different things that it can be really, really tricky to kind of navigate that. But again, you did a really great job. You were following up on a lot of those print resources that we talked about, and seemed to kind of navigate those waters. And then we found actually a printer that I have worked with in the past, and we kind of came together on this one printer in the end, which actually worked out really well. But yeah, the print process, I'd have to agree that that can definitely be a challenge, especially to the uninitiated. It gets a little easier over
Yes.
time, but yeah.
I mean, you literally have I had no idea what goes into the printing process at all. And when you're explaining to me like different types of printers, like laser versus whatever that other type is called,
Yeah.
and I just had no concept. But I honestly, initially, before you and I talked about the journal, I started kind of playing around with the idea of like, how can I create this journal myself? But there's so much that goes into even the formatting when you submit for printing that has to be done right, that I can't imagine what I would have
Yeah.
gotten myself into.
Yeah,
So you
definitely.
need that person that like has that experience that can help guide you during that process for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if it's not a graphic designer, often the people, the sales reps and the people that work at the printer can be so useful. We worked with a sales rep who was super helpful throughout the whole process.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually, even in quarantine times, we got to finally meet in person one time at the printer, socially distanced with masks. But we finally met face to face at the printer so that we could kind of see some of those paper samples and the binding. I guess we were looking at the proof actually at that point. Had you gone on your own to look at some paper samples and work with our rep to see what our final product might look like?
Yes. So, Stephanie, you had offered to do that. But I got the call that I could go look that day. And so I was just so excited about picking out options. I just went over there myself.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, so our contact that we had, he was awesome to work with, like Stephanie said, and just really like took the time to let me feel the papers, the thickness of them, and then see what like the size journal that I was looking to get, like what that actually looked like in real life, and then the coil binding, all of that. So yeah, that was really helpful to pick that out ahead of time and kind of know what you're planning on, rather than have like kind of be shocked once you get to that proof point.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think a lot of people these days also are looking at like online printers, and if you're not working with a local resource, it's a lot more difficult to see what your actual outcome's going to be. Web design is easy where you can just kind of change something on the fly whenever you feel like it. But when you're putting ink on paper, it is, that's dollars right there. That is, consumable materials, like that's a big deal, and you don't want anything to go wrong with that. So I definitely recommend that people work with a local printer that you can have that kind of relationship with and ask those questions and really see those samples and that kind of thing. That said, your husband saved me with his keen eye when we did our press check that day. Graphic designer user error definitely left some placeholders in the table of contents, and Joelle's husband definitely saved me.
Oh, Thank
Yeah.
God for that man.
Yeah, yeah, I second that for sure. But it's those kinds of things though that, when you're working on a 200-page journal, there's, I hate to say it and I don't want to look too carefully, but there might be something else, you know. But, that's a lot of pages of content when you and I like almost get so close to it. We almost aren't looking at certain things like that. So it was really helpful to have that extra eye on that day, to have
Yeah.
him come and visit with us. That was super helpful too. What was the most exciting part of this process, either the branding or the journal?
I think throughout the whole process, what I loved the most was getting emails from you because I knew if Stephanie O was sending me an email, then it was going to have like an updated version of whatever it was we were working on at the time. And so it was just like getting to see this creation like slowly come to life. And we would tweak something and then you would send it back to me. And then I get to see what that idea looked like. And it was just so exciting to see it slowly happen, and to really see it take on a form of, you don't really know what it's going to look like. You have this idea, you have the direction in your mind, but to see it like just take on its own form and to become an actual like product creation. The same with the branding. It was just so fun to go through that process. I feel like it's kind of like having a baby, like
Right.
you're expecting, you get to go see those ultrasound pictures. Like it was very similar to that. I
Yeah,
loved
yeah.
it.
I've
Oh my
definitely used
goodness.
that analogy before. It's definitely like birthing a baby.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally do not have any babies, but I have a lot of brand babies, I guess. Definitely, definitely. I mean,
It's a
it's
lot of work that goes into the process,
mhm,
and a lot of thinking and kind of just
mhm.
figuring things out. And then to get that reward at the end is awesome. I
Mhm.
love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the process, we see shiny Instagram photos, we see little time lapse of like artists doing amazing paintings and stuff like that. We're saturated with these like gorgeous images of gorgeous design work, but you don't see kind of the weeks and weeks that go behind some of that work. And I think from start to finish, I think our branding and journal process was, it was several months. For both projects. So it's definitely a labor of love for sure.
Yeah, it is.
Mhm.
And I was going to ask you, so between branding and printing graphics and all of that, like what is your favorite part of all of that?
Ooh,
What do you
that,
look forward to the most?
yeah, that's such a good question. I do love branding because there's just something fun about kind of crafting that very unique visual presence for each and every client. I think that everybody has a very particular unique vision. So I like really uncovering what that particular perspective is and putting that visual face to it. I love that process. But I gotta say, there's something about print design that I really, really love. And I think also there's not a lot of opportunities to complete print design projects anymore. There's so much that's digital based. A lot of people might look at this journal and want to make like the app version of it or something. That's almost more common than having a printed piece like this. So there's something really special and nice about having that opportunity to put ink on paper. Because I think in graphic design land, especially, it's kind of like a precious little process that we hold near to us. But I think from in this project, like you said, developing that brand over time and seeing that come to life and really pull together, and then to see that translated to the print design, because I do love print design, being able to piece it apart and kind of put the puzzle pieces back together the way to like really bring your content to life. This was a really, really fun print project to do. It was, I love making pretty things. I named my company Delightful Things. I mean, I kind of like using the botanicals and the bright colors and stuff. I think that was another reason you and I just kind of clicked, was like the style. I feel like we were really on the same page when it came to the style and what we were looking for. So all that just worked really, really well. But yeah, both of these were awesome projects. It's almost hard to pick between branding design and print design, but this was a really fun example of both. I think that each of these, I really enjoyed the process here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Mhm.
was definitely a lot of fun. What
Mhm.
would you say that your style, do graphic designers have
Oh,
styles? Like, is that
I
a
think
thing, or do you
so.
just kind of take on whatever the person
Mhm.
enjoys and loves? I mean, what does that look like?
That's
Because I
such
feel
a
like that would be kind of hard
yeah.
for me.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think that a lot of graphic designers do have kind of a style. I think there are some graphic designers that maybe have more of like a commercial style where it's kind of more of a crowd-pleasing style or something rather than some sort of particular, very artistic, abstract kind of style. I generally I like to think of myself as like not having a style, but then when people reach out to me, they're like, "Oh, I saw this and I really like this like light, airy, minimalist style." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, okay." So I'm like, "Yeah, I guess I have a style." um, but I also like within that, I like bringing out those really particular little characteristics. I think that each design choice we have an opportunity to make is really it's really an opportunity to bring out another aspect of that personality. So, you know, whether it's the typeface, in this piece for the journal and the branding, bringing in that script typeface, like that just, that punched that personality up just like right at the right amount, you know? Finding that script
Hmm.
was like, I felt like I'd found buried treasure. I was like,
I love that
yes,
script.
right? It works so well. And it's like, it's funny to me because it's so illegible. But the way that we're using it, it's somehow become like very legible. It's been fine. Like we haven't had any issues with it. But it's just like, it's probably one of the most extreme scripts I've been able to use in a brand, which, you know, again, that's kind of like why this was so fun. Like we got to push this in different directions that we don't always get to push things in, you know? So I think it was really just a really fun opportunity. I mentioned that you created all the content for this journal. Is that correct? You worked with a couple people over time. Do you want to talk about your process developing before you even got to me?
Yeah, so I have a couple of girls that are on my team with First Love, and I kind of just one day threw out the idea, "Hey, one day I'd love to create this journal." Um, and one of them just kind of took it and ran with it. And just within a couple of days, she had a rough draft of what she was like, "Well, I think we could do something like this." So really just pushed me to get it started. So each one of us kind of took a couple of sections, and we individually kind of honed in on our sections, and really just took time to yeah, come up with what we wanted to have in that piece. And then we would come together and we would hash it over and over again, until we were all happy with each of the sections, the pieces. Because I think there's plenty of journals out there, and there's plenty of journals that are like prayer journals, and with a bunch of pages for you to fill out. But it was really important to us to have a lot of like tips and how to, because again, the mission of First Love is to help women and give them the tools to feel like they know how to connect to God. So each section starts off with like a couple pages of just some tips and thoughts and ideas of how you can use that section. So.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Do you feel like your content changed throughout the design process at all, or did it pretty much stick to what you originally envisioned?
It did change. So I think initially we had a lot more content. And then as we
Mm-hmm.
started seeing things on paper and seeing those graphics, and seeing what that actually looked like, how much it was on each
Mm-hmm.
page, how many pages it took up, I think we had to kind of adjust as we went along, especially when we got to that printing process too.
Mm-hmm.
We had to become kind of choosy with how many pages of what we were going to put on those pages. So yeah, it definitely started out way bigger and way more, and we just kind of brought it down in. And it was actually nice because once you get to that design aspect, you and I had a conversation where I said, "Okay, I want our tips pages to be only 2 pages each,"
Mm-hmm.
and so that helped us to kind of redefine what we wanted to put in there. Even.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, over time, when you were pulling some of that content out, you know, if you did see a spread that you were like, oh, well, you know, maybe not for this journal, um, are you repurposing some of that, or are you using it in some of your other guides on your website? How is that working out?
Yeah. Yeah. So we had, when we launched the journal, we had it before doing that, we had about a 1 month launch group that we just did a lot of different activities with and gave a lot of freebies to. So
Hmm.
a lot of that information ended up going directly to them. And then we will over time release that to everybody else. Because yeah, it's definitely, it was good content. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even we have the slideshow going in the background here with some of the photos of the journal, and I think that all the like instructional spreads were ended up being such a beautiful touch in this. I think that you did such a nice job of creating a tool that's really usable. I think that from a designer standpoint, I feel like you were really concerned about that with your end user, your community when they're sitting there with this journal. And I just think, you're so thoughtful in the things that you included. And it's such a functional piece. It's so beautiful. It brings more beauty to
thank
it because
you.
it works well. I love
Thank you.
that. Absolutely. Um, why why would anybody choose to go through a branding process like this? Why was this beneficial for you? Or, why would other people consider this?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, even people that I've talked to that are kind of in that startup phase, or they've been trying to do something online for the last year, even.
Mhm.
I think a lot of us come to that place where we decide that we really see the need, that we need to be consistent with our message. And, they say most of communication is nonverbal.
Mhm.
And there's some that can happen on social media where people can see your actions as you're talking and things like that, but not a lot. And
Mhm.
so I think that your messaging really comes out based on the look, the colors, the messaging, everything that you do. People pick up on those nonverbal cues, and you want that to become like really consistent and with where your values are, and what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to communicate. So for me, I wanted a lot of, in my niche, what I'm trying to do. I see a lot of like muted tones, which kind of expresses this reverence and awe of God, which definitely that's great. There's a good place for that. But for me, I wanted to capitalize more on just the life-giving vibrancy that comes through knowing God, that changes our lives and gives us more of a fullness inside of our souls. And so I wanted to do happy, brighter, yeah, just more life in my colors.
Mhm.
And then, of course, like having those botanicals in there, like communicated that as well, just that life giving aspect.
Mhm.
But I needed help with that.
Mhm.
I did not come to you just saying like, okay, I want to create a brand and this is what I want.
Yeah.
It was more like I came to you and saying, this is my message.
Yeah.
This is what I want to communicate. Help me get to that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you kind of took what I said, and then you kind of went through your own researching
Mhm.
phase and for a couple of weeks, and you're like, and then I'll get back to you. So
Mhm.
like, what were you looking for? What were you researching during that time?
Yeah, good question. When I go out to kind of look for inspiration, well, I won't even limit it just to inspiration. I'm kind of looking for everything. I'm looking for anything that has any relation to what you're doing and what you're talking about. So, you mentioned that there are a couple other groups in the space that you're working in, and so I'm looking at their brands. I'm diving deep into how they're using those elements and their muted color palettes and things like that. I want to know what competition is doing so that we can kind of navigate around that and have a really unique voice. But I'm also looking for, those things to kind of inspire what this visual brand might actually be. So those color palettes, you and I looked a lot at some color palettes. That was a big one. And honestly, that's the cohesive element of this brand. That's the thing that continually ties everything together, which has just been great. But I'm trying to kind of find anything possible, basically. Same thing when it goes to, choosing the typography and things like that. I'm basically, laying out, one of your key lines. I typically, steal a sentence somewhere from social media or something, and I'll set it in a bunch of different typefaces. And I'll be looking at, 40, 50 typefaces until I narrow in on, well, that one definitely not, that one definitely not. But you can't really do the narrowing down until you go out and seek out all the information you can find. So that's really key, I think, to my process, and especially that research phase, is really just finding anything I possibly can that relates. And then a lot of my actual like creation process comes from that curating. So I'm constantly like narrowing in on, okay, well, what does this look like? Is it this shape or is it this shape? And kind of molding it as I go. Yeah, it was really funny working, because when we first started working on the branding, of course, I always want to give multiple directions. And I kind of do this thing as a graphic designer where I kind of know in the back of my head like where it's gonna end up a little bit. Like the color palette, somehow I just like I kind of felt it. Maybe it was from different inspiration images you found. We also worked with, I want to give a shout out to Katrina, who has helped me on my side and has helped you on your side for sure. Katrina from KRB Executive Services has been a super help. She got some of these inspiration images for us too. That color palette was just like this little seed in my mind. But when I'm trying to give you like two different directions, I kind of like purposely don't give you exactly what you've asked for, which is probably like only what I would tell you now in hindsight. like, well, like
It makes sense.
right? Because it's like, I want to see, like, how do you feel about this extreme? And how do you feel about this extreme? And there were parts and pieces of both of those that we kind of looked at and kind of started weaving their way into what the brand ended up becoming. So yeah, it's a winding process. There's a lot to kind of go into it, but I think that's probably for me, probably the most important part of the process is to have that frame of reference. It's really, really impossible to just design with blinders on. You're gonna either step on toes, you're gonna start doing something. I might have very well picked a logo that looked like one of your, I hate saying competitors because you're not in a space that has competitors, but I'm sure you guys like all love each other. But you know what I mean? It's you don't want to step on toes. You don't want to like do something that looks like somebody else's. I can't imagine trying to design in my own little design bubble. For sure.
And then talking about like that process of kind of giving me two different options. And then there was one point, it was pretty funny actually, that I told you this one font that you have, like, it's not my favorite. I want you to go back and give me a different idea of what we can use. And then the next time we met, you're like, I just kept this font just a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Just to see what you thought about it, looking at it a second time. And I don't know what happened, but by the time we were done with that meeting, I had decided that not only did I like that font, but I loved that font. And that font was going to stay with me.
I love it. That's awesome. I love it. I love it. Yeah, absolutely. I
It
mean,
just
sometimes you
had
just don't know. Yeah. You have to
yeah.
see it through different lenses, I probably put a different color or something behind it, and all of a sudden it like looks totally different, Context
I
just like
feel
makes
like
such a
it
difference.
just communicated like two things that I wanted to, just very professional, but at the same time with a little bit of like fun and happiness to it. And the font itself is all of the letters are just very clean, straight lines, but then you have like two letters that just have this, like the R has a little flippy thing on it. And I don't know what it is. It just it gives it a little bit of fun to it. And I was just like, nope, keep it. I love
Yeah.
it now.
Yep. I think once I was working on that logo mark, and I'm going to pull it up here in a second. I have all this process work here. But once I was working on the logo mark, and because you have the one R in your name with First Love, I set it, and with the R having the little, like, I call it like a kickstand. It's got this cute little flip of its little kickstand there, and it just is that one little punch of personality to bring it up. So I was super happy that lived. It worked out well. I'm gonna click over here to Illustrator and we're gonna look at some of
Yeah.
this. These are actual process documents. Actual process of creating the branding for First Love. Let me minimize something else here. I have something in my way. Um, and we, like Joelle said, we went through a lot of different phases here, and this is basically one of the phases. Um, Down here is where we kind of started. When you mentioned that, the font was a little okay, and this is one of those extremes I was kind of throwing at you to see what you thought. I kind of went like real like mid-century mod kind of extreme on one there. But there was a little hint of something that I could tell you kind of connected with. Even though it wasn't like the exact right style, there was something that kind of spoke to you. Do you remember what it was like to see these first two um, design directions initially?
Um, I I just like you don't know what you're going to see. You don't know
Mm-hmm.
how everything that you've tried to communicate is going to get translated through an
Mm-hmm.
artist's hands and ideas. And so I remember looking at them and like knowing like this isn't 100%, but like both of them I definitely like different pieces to them. And I don't actually see it kind of until we sit down and talk about it
Mm-hmm.
together for the first time, and then kind of taking the next day to just like reflect on it. Then you kind of can piece and figure out what it is you like about each one of those.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, time is essential in this process. I think you're right that that like marinating time so that you can kind of settle on it and think about it, roll it around in your brain a little bit. That's absolutely essential to this process. They joke in graphic design land, they joke that, there's there's cheap, fast, and good, and you can only have two of them. You can't have good design work really, really fast. It's just like those two things just don't go together. So um, yeah, absolutely. I think that it's essential for something as big as this to really take your time through each and every step of the process. It is not a magic button once we get into the design program here. There are sketches that preceded this in my sketchbook. There's another design document that preceded this. You can see my title here says revised design. So we have multiple layers here of honing in. Basically, it's all that narrowing down. Here's one of those color palettes we were playing with at first, just trying to see how things are working. That's another part of it, is really just experimenting. We kind of honed in on certain elements that we like, and then because we have that end goal of having the toolkit for you to use and break apart and use how you need, we want to make sure that we want to test it all out, basically. I want to throw a bunch of things together and see how they're kind of talking to each other. So that's what this whole phase was about. You can see we started pulling in the script typeface. We were working with, this to me is how the mid-century mod kind of lived, is that little hint of layering, the way that text kind of can float over some of the background bars. So just little things like that. We honed in kind of on the element, and then we started playing with the botanicals in this one. But you can see that this color scheme is still not quite to where we ended up. So I'm going to pull out here to our final design boards. And this is where we landed. I think you actually sent me a graphic that had a lot of these colors in it. And I kind of like, I tweaked a little bit here and here. But honestly, like, I feel like we came to this color palette like pretty solidly by the end of it.
Yeah, and it is funny because I think you had mentioned this earlier. It ended up being pretty much the same color palette. I feel like that we had initially kind of talked about, and you
Mm-hmm.
had in your initial like direction designs, like that pink, that gold, a
Mm-hmm.
little bit like lighter of a coral was in there, and then the navy. So there was a lot that was still in there. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's funny
absolutely.
how it comes full circle sometimes.
Definitely, definitely. But yeah, the brand kind of expanded from here. You can see we have all the different logo lockups. So again, all those little parts and pieces so that you can stick together an Instagram graphic without having to even think about it. I hope that you have too much stuff to put in an Instagram graphic.
I have plenty. It's awesome.
That's awesome. Perfect. So this is kind of what that, the background kind of looks like. You can see on the left here, this is basically the final branding board that we got to. So this is essentially the toolkit guide. And I always try to incorporate this so that everybody kind of has a sense of what it looks like. It's a visual rule book essentially. But to me, this is like an essential part of that toolkit so that you have a frame of reference for whatever it is that you need to put together. And also that any other graphic designer could easily take this and work on stuff, that's also a goal of mine. I've been the graphic designer on the other end of that too many times, where you're like, oh wow, what's happening here? So it's definitely definitely an area I like to make sure that everything is just buttoned up and ready for you to just start rolling with. And you totally have. Everything's so amazing. I'm just like, I'm so thrilled every time I see a new Instagram pop up or anything like that. I'm just so happy for you that this just came to life. I can see you in it. It's wonderful.
Well, definitely whenever I post, I'm like, I hope that Stephanie approves of the way I'm using the branding.
You have like a
So I'm
secret
glad to
creative
hear that.
director. Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. Oh my gosh, I love
Because it
it.
is like it's your creation too.
Mhm.
So, I know
Yeah.
that you probably have opinions about it. So I'm glad you like it.
Good opinions. Very good opinions. Yeah, you're doing an awesome job. Absolutely awesome.
And I
Um,
still like
yeah.
this board right here. Like I
Yeah.
still reference
Oh,
this a
good.
lot when I go to recreating because I think if you
Mhm.
scroll down a little bit more,
Mhm.
it actually show
Yeah.
right there. That
Mhm.
right there is very helpful because then I
Mhm.
can see like, okay, these are the colors that look really good to mix together, and these are the
Mhm.
colors that to be consistent with my branding, I'll mix these together because
Mhm.
there's a lot of colors
Exactly.
there, a whole lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, back to this step where we were kind of throwing things at the wall and experimenting. That because I knew we were going to have that very large color palette, I really wanted to make sure that that layering was working. And so it really was, experimenting and experimenting to hone it down to the point that, these combinations generally work pretty well. I'm totally confident in any of those. And we talked about the script font before too. Like layering a script font is like in graphic design land, this is like madness, Joelle. This is madness. People are like rolling over in graves. But this works. Like it works so well, But I think it only works because we were able to have, all these really great conversations. We were able to have an open line of communication where we could actually like, ask each other and tell each other what we really needed to. And we had that time, again, that process time to experiment with all the things and just make sure that it was really working. So it's just
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. And I feel like for me, like being someone that like wanted a lot to be able to work with, there's a
Mhm.
lot that is in this brand because you have the
Mhm.
fun fonts, you have the colors, you have the sort of starburst logo, and then the botanicals in there. And to have someone that has an eye for all of that to say like, okay, this is how we can put it all together and create a cohesive look is
Mhm.
so helpful.
Mhm.
Because I would have been stuck just in like monotone land if I
Mhm.
didn't have someone that knew how to kind of create that look of variety and a lot
Mhm.
of life to it, that could make it also cohesive at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you were a joy to work with. Everything, it was just from start to finish. Your content was beautiful, your ideas absolutely beautiful, and I think that your vision for the journal, I mean, I put the branding on it. Like I kind of wrap it in the wrapping paper at the end, but this is from you. This is your creative product, and it's just so wonderful. Everything is awesome. I'm gonna flip real quick. I have a document camera up here, and I actually have the journal with us. So I just wanted to flip real
Oh,
quick. Yeah, I just want to show off a little bit here. Again, Joelle's content is like amazing. She gives you all these different, how to use it, tips on different things, and then a lot of really flexible space. It's hard to tell here, but there are little dots. So it's like a, the moleskin dot journal kind of layout. So you can have your space to lay everything out, draw, bullet journal, whatever you want to do within this format, basically. And then a lot of really helpful tools where you've really broken up the space and kind of directed your users in a more structured way. So I think that's a really nice part of this is that you do have a little bit of the instruction, you have a little bit of like the totally free space, and you have a little bit of that guidance. So it doesn't feel like it's overbearing at all. It feels like a really usable piece, I think. How has it
Thank you.
been using it yourself?
I have loved it. Now, so before I created the journal, I actually, and before I even talked to you, I actually got a notebook, like a composition notebook, and started playing around with a format that I liked. And I started looking at like different formats that are currently out there. So this is pretty close to what I was using in that composition notebook,
Mhm.
which is some extra things added in there. And the beauty being one of those pieces. I just love beautiful things. It makes me excited to like sit down and use it.
Yeah,
So I really have loved it. It has
that's
really helped
awesome.
me just be more intentional
Mhm.
and like, what am I praying for? Like, who am I praying for? And what
Mhm.
was I reading in my Bible yesterday? So all of that, like, it's been so
Absolutely.
fun.
That's
And then
awesome.
share in peace. So
Yeah. And then you've now, well, you were telling me that sales have been very good, and I'm so excited to hear that this is in the hands of people. So, what have you been hearing from the people that have already gotten it?
Um, just a lot of women who are just saying that, wow, I kind of felt lost. Like when I would try to spend time with God, not knowing, like, okay, what am I doing here? What am I trying to accomplish? And now just feeling like they have like a tool to kind of help them guide through that has been the biggest thing that I've heard, which is
Mhm.
just awesome.
Yeah.
And that's definitely my heart. So,
That's awesome. We all need a little
yeah.
anchoring, I think, over the last
Yeah.
year. It's been a tough year, so I'm sure that this is just, it's such a nice personal, I think we talked about that a bit. It's such a personal size. It feels like it's, part of your daily routine almost. So that's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that your community's connecting with it. Um,
Yeah.
so where do you go from here, Joelle? Where can people find you? What are your next big plans? What's going on with First Love?
So you can find me on Instagram, First Love Women, also on Facebook, the same. Our website is firstlovewomen.com, and we have a very vibrant community of over 500 women now, which is really
Awesome.
exciting. But we just do a lot of interaction in that community, and that's where a lot of my heart is just kind of like pouring into women and giving them those resources. Um, and then from here, lots of ideas
Yeah.
that kind of I've just been mulling around in my mind for a bit. And Stephanie, of course, is involved in those as they as
Happy to
they
be. Happy
begin
to
to
be.
develop.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I'm excited
Absolutely.
about this coming year and yeah, what it has to hold. So, what
Very
about you,
cool.
Stephanie?
Oh yeah, same. Delightful things. I always have a million ideas. I think you and I both have creative brain. That sounds sounds like our common here. Um, but I'm hoping to continue working with people like you that have big, awesome, creative ideas, and keep putting it out there. Honestly, keep broadcasting things to YouTube and putting it out there. My community there has been growing a little bit, and so I'm excited about just being able to reach more people, I think. I also, like we talked about before, teaching is a big part of what I do. And so by being able to have the online presence, I feel like I'm able to increase, my student base and my client base. And I just feel like it's a really great way for me to not just be talking to myself in a room or talking to, a handful of people. It's a great way to kind of get out there. So hopefully just more of that, more delightful things.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, Joelle, it is really, really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for all your time dissecting this wonderful project. I can't wait to hear what you have going on next. And I'm really happy to jump in and help you any way I can. I think that's going to be really
Yes.
exciting.
Yes, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me tonight, and maybe
Yeah.
we'll catch up a bit about our next project. That'd be fun if we do a 2.0. We'll come back.
Definitely. I
That's
think that would be
awesome.
a lot of fun. I think that like a lot of people, maybe they've never even considered doing anything like this, like
Mm-hmm.
creating a printed resource or material.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe they have and just automatically just X that off their list of like, no, I can't do that. That's too overwhelming. But um, yeah, it's definitely doable. And I think if you
Mm-hmm.
just have the right person to help guide you through that, that has been through it before, like it's way easier than what it can be. So
Mm-hmm.
definitely want to encourage
Absolutely.
people, like if you have an idea in your mind,
Mm-hmm.
just find that person that can help walk you through that process, because
Absolutely.
you'll gain so much confidence, just in your own abilities once you
Mm-hmm.
kind of step out and do something like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm more than happy to help take that leap. I love taking that leap. That's awesome. Well, thank you again. We will chat
Yes.
soon. I really appreciate all your time. And yeah, good things to you in 2021. Looking forward to seeing what comes next.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Stephanie.
Absolutely.
This was a blast. Thank
Good. I'm
you.
so glad. You're so welcome. We'll talk soon, okay?
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.